Black Magic Woman podcast acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on. We also acknowledge traditional owners of the land where you, the listener or viewer, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to our elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was Aboriginal land and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bayles.
Thank you very much for joining us for another amazing episode of the Black Magic Woman podcast. I am your host, Mundanara Bayles, and it is so good for people now on YouTube. We've been on for a while, but we still need people to join us online. You can watch this show if you're not already on there. Please subscribe. And for all of our other listeners, not just in this amazing country, now known as Australia, but for our listeners all around the world, it's an absolute pleasure. Every single week, we do our best that we can to bring another guest on the show. And it's interesting because, you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, First Nations people are diverse. We have different experiences and our stories are different. And I think that most people think we're all the same, or we might all know Johnny from Sydney. Some people are very limited in their knowledge or understanding of us as First Nations peoples. So I have been literally, I've been following you, crossed paths once or twice, don't really know your story. And I told you already that I don't like to Google people. I literally like to hear people's stories first on the podcast because my reactions are genuine. So I tell people all the time that this is a podcast. It's, you know, a conversational style. We're sitting on a couch.
It's very comfortable.
We're here in Gadigal country. If people don't know where Gadigal country is, we are in the heart of Sydney. And when I think about connecting with mob or reconnecting with mob, there's so much in our stories that, you know, we can relate to. So having you on the podcast today, I'm telling you now, you're in for a treat for people that are listening. Can I please get you, first, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And jumping on, even at last minute. I love the fact that mob can go, I'm going to be there. You just jumped off a plane. We'll get to that. But can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and also our viewers? Your name, your mob, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, Ginagay Yamdoro Ninda Garayagu Nina Doro Nanyundi Bijigaruhiga. Thank you so much for having me, Mundanara. My name is Associate Professor Rick Macourt. I'm a very proud Gumbaynggirr man. I'm the Associate Dean of First Nations Strategy in the Faculty of Medicine and Health at the University of Sydney. And I'm also the Managing Director of First Nations Economics, which is a charity. But my real story is that I'm one of 9 children. I have 6 older sisters, a younger sister and a younger brother. Grew up in Bowraville, Nambucca Heads, a real small community town.
So Nambucca, Bowraville is the Gumbaynggirr country. That's the language.
Mid-North Coast.
Mid-North Coast. For people that don't even know Mid-North Coast in New South Wales.
Near Coffs Harbour. People know Coffs Harbour.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Unless you're from somewhere up north, over on the West Coast, and never been over this side, well, you are missing out because it is beautiful country.
Yep.
Gumbaynggirr people are next door to Bundjalung country, and then down more Dungutty, Warramai.
Yeah,
so I know your mom.
Yeah.
So you grew up there.
Yep, I spent the first 12 years of my life there. But then I came to boarding school here in Sydney for the very first program that they had at St Joseph's College to bring Aboriginal children from the bush to get an education. And leaving home at 12, leaving culture and community certainly was it was the most difficult experience of my life, but it's clearly given me the resilience to be where I am today. And I'm just very proud of the privileges that I've been afforded to be here and to be able to speak with you.
Oh my goodness. Well, you know what? The fact that you are able to speak the language that your ancestors spoke since the first sunrise, we're going back at least 140,000 years if we want to go by science, but we always say that we've been here since time immemorial. That to me, as a very proud Black woman, my mother's language, Bundjalung, Gweagal, and the Gweagal people were the first people to see the first fleet arriving in 1788.
Really?
And then my Wonnarua people, and my mum's people, spoke the Gringai language. And we've got a word list. We've got a lot of words. And I know my Auntie Sharon Edgar Jones is a Wonnarua, very respected Wonnarua woman and revitalising language. So can I just let people know that there's about 1,000 Aboriginal languages. There's a website called Gambay, Gambay, for people that don't know, especially people that live in Australia and call this place home. 90% of our Aboriginal languages are considered endangered languages today.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
People say to me all the time, where are you from? I'm Aboriginal. Oh, where'd you grow up here? Oh, can you speak your language? No, I can't.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I think it's, for me, because my partner is from overseas, he's Brazilian, I think it was very apparent that to understand somebody's culture entirely, to understand their family and their history and where they come from, you need to learn their language. So I learned Portuguese, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, I speak French, I speak Portuguese. How is it that I don't know my own language?
Yes.
And
the guilt does.
It was massive. And I mean, it's difficult. I've got a dictionary that they've created for our mob, and it's, you know, it's beautiful. It's difficult. It's got our dreaming stories in it, but it also has more declensions than Latin. Like the format, the grammar of the language is so difficult. So I rely really heavily on some of my elders, like Uncle Michael Jarrett, who runs Gumbengia classes.
I was going to say, I see it on LinkedIn. I see it on Facebook. It is literally embedded.
Everywhere.
It's in the schools in that region.
So when I was very young, my mum ran Gigagamumbi, which is a local Aboriginal preschool in Nambucca Heads. And I remember that they have Murabai next door, which is the language centre. And so as the director, she would bring all the elders from the language centre to teach all of the kids the minute that they could walk and talk how to speak language.
And that's where it starts.
Exactly. And you get that little spark of curiosity in a young person's mind that could potentially lead them to paths that they can't even contemplate.
Well, you know, I'm going to say that we are proof of that. When you grow up with your Aboriginal family and immersed in Aboriginal culture, and you're also obviously part of an Aboriginal community, it's different because, you know, not every black fella
gets to have that.
have had that privilege. So I always say, you know, just to say that I'm a Wonnarua Bundjalung Gweagal woman through my mother, and I'm, not Bundjalung through my father, Birri-Gubba-Gungaloo through my father. My mum was forcibly removed under government policy. She was a ward of the state. She was institutionalised. That was a government policy in the 1960s in this country. My mum didn't know her country.
Yeah.
She grew up in Redfern, born and raised on the block, and you knew, even with red hair and freckles, you knew she was a black woman.
Yeah.
So identity, culture, language, all of that is intertwined, right?
Yeah. And you're right. I think there's immense privilege in being able to access that. I remember when I was in year 12, and I think I was telling you about this before, but I was doing my English major work. I sat down with one of my aunties, Auntie Emily Williams, who's now passed, and sat down with her, and for the first time heard her story and heard how she'd been taken away and heard what happened to her, you know, to our broader family and how that had affected her. But yet when she spoke about it, she hadn't lost that spark of love and connection because she'd been able to return. And it's like, you know, no matter how far you travel, no matter how different your experiences are or where you grew up, when you return to country, it just embraces you. And I think that's the thing that sort of kept me going when I was separated from country, because I think as young people in Australia, you have to make a choice sometimes. You know, do you stay with family? Do you stay with community and culture? Or do you go where the opportunities are? And, you know, I didn't get that choice. My mum forced it on me, thank God. I thought I was going to jail, but it was just boarding school. But, you know, I got to experience both worlds. I got to have that opportunity to learn how to walk in both worlds. And, you know, I look at my nieces, right? You know, they're from Warman up in WA. And my older sister had to move to Darwin, away from country, right, away from the rest of their family, just so they could go to a school with more than one classroom. You know, it's that sort of sacrifice that I think not many other people really experience, but us black fellas are often asked to choose between culture and opportunity because we live in a white man's world, and you have to learn how to navigate that space and still manage to hold on to your blackness, which is bloody hard.
It is, but you know what? I see it like as we're code switching between that Aboriginal world and Western world, where it's a skill in the end. Like, we get really good at it. Most of us have done really well to hold conversations with people that are non-Aboriginal and to make sense using these English words because most people don't know that we were self-taught the English language. There's no English school set up and, you know, sit down and this is how it's all broken down. So even going through high school, I struggled. I struggled so bad that all I wanted to do, you know, when I finished, well, I didn't want to finish school, but my dad said, if you finish high school, I'll give you a plane ticket. And I'll take you anywhere in the world. Having 8 sisters myself, growing up in Redfern, the only holiday we had was camping.
Same here.
Now, for non-Aboriginal people, for all you white fellas that are listening or watching, I hate camping. I'm not a camper and I don't even know if glamping will meet my standards.
No, too many mosquitoes.
No, I didn't know it because we did it all our life. So for non-Aboriginal people that see the joy in camping, that's okay. You do whatever, you know, do you. So to go on a holiday with my dad, as like I'm not the middle child, there's 5 older, 3 below me. I felt like the middle child because you're the one that kind of.
The glue.
Well, I thought that we're the ones that, like, no one, not forgotten, but it was easy for me to kind of get up to no good.
It
was easy to fly under the radar because I'm not the youngest, not the oldest. And so I honestly feel like being in that middle part somewhere that you kind of you were forgotten a bit.
See, I mean, for me, you know, my femininity as a man came out very young. And I'm surprised my mum didn't clock that I was gay when I was little. But we had this unspoken connection because my sisters were very independent. I mean, they were like having 6 older mums, right? You know how it feels. And so my mum had always wanted a boy and my dad had always wanted a boy. But I loved sitting with my mum cooking and, you know, instead of chopping firewood with my dad.
Leave me in the house with the women. Leave me in the kitchen.
Absolutely.
I'll make tea and toast any day.
And I really sympathise as well with that holiday. I remember, I think the only holiday I can remember taking before I was old enough to take myself was we got in a paddy wagon and we were driving up to Byron Bay and the paddy wagon broke down about an hour outside of Coffs, and so we all had to call the rest of our family, our cousins, to come pick us up, drive us home, and that was the end of the holiday, right? But at the same time,
there's no RACQ.
No.
Who could afford RACQ?
We could barely afford a car.
I know.
You know, and you have 9 kids.
You're
I think we had a Tarago at one point.
We had a Tarago, a silver Tarago.
They were pretty unbreakable, but there's no other experience than being locked in a car with 8 girls and 1 boy and your parents and just being like, oh, yeah, what am I doing here?
So you live here now in Sydney.
Next to the university.
And what are you doing at the university?
So, to be frank,
because I know there's this title,
Associate Dean. To be honest, I hate it because I feel so awkward and out of place because I'm 30 years younger than most of the other people I work with, and I'm probably closer to the age of some of our postgraduate students.
Of course.
And titles have always made me feel uncomfortable. Because, I mean, there's always that imposter syndrome, right? Like, how do I fit in this world when no one around me looks like me? I mean, they've done a wonderful job to make me feel really quite comfortable. But essentially, my role is to make sure that as a faculty and as a university, we're committed to retaining Aboriginal staff and students, making their experiences here culturally appropriate, giving them the support, but also lighting a fire, underneath their bum.
Like, how did you end up being the dean, associate dean? How did you end up in that position?
Well, I told my older sister is Australia's first Indigenous neurologist, right? So I had some big shoes to fill.
Wow.
But she's not yet a professor. And so when I told her about this, she lost it. But essentially, I was working for Treasury. So I ran the Indigenous Expenditure and Outcomes for the state. So anytime the government wanted to spend money on First Nations people, it came to me. And I got to ask those questions like, did Aboriginal people ask for this? Has this been evaluated? Are we actually enabling self-determination? And I think it got to a point where I could see from a government perspective, I've been working in government almost my entire career, that, I needed to step away from that for a little bit. I needed to be more in contact with our young people and with people on the ground that are going to be that next generation of leader. And I think because of my experience, I could bridge the gap between our Aboriginal students and the very traditional colonial institution that it is a university. It's common across, I think, many universities. And because I had that experience, I can hopefully make that transition for another young person a little bit easier, or I can open the eyes to a decision maker or a lecturer that's talking about First Nations issues and maybe hasn't done their research.
Yeah.
And so I like to think of myself as a support system to make sure that we do things the right way. But it also meant that I could get closer to research. And for me...
Is that what you're passionate about?
Well, I'm passionate about many things. I think financial access and education is incredibly important because 30% of our health outcomes are socioeconomic status, right? But on the flip side, Indigenous LGBTI or rainbow mob are some of the most under-researched, misunderstood communities, misaccounted for communities. And me having come out so early, having sat on the boards of Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras, Black Rainbow, First Nations Rainbow, it was incredibly apparent to me that even within LGBTI research, which is a niche, that they forgot about mob and that there's not enough. And so there's organisations like Black that are slowly coming up to the forefront, but it's the universities that are getting the research grants that are pumping the interest. And when you realise the suicide rate among rainbow mob in community is what it is, like we can't even put a figure on it because people are so scared to come out because,
wow,
I
have never thought about, because if you haven't come out, then that data's not there. You're not accounted for. You don't really exist within that space.
Within the system, exactly. But we get calls and emails at Black Rainbow from people in some of the most remote communities, the Tiwi Islands, the Central Australia, who just need someone to talk to or just need someone to show them that being Black and gay is okay. And I remember with Black Rainbow when we brought the Tiwi Island sister girls down to Sydney, some of them had never been on a plane. And just to see that to be gay and Aboriginal was something to be celebrated was enough to change somebody's life.
So it's not celebrated in their communities?
Not always. I mean, I think many of our communities differ.
There's a stigma there.
I mean, look, to be frank, back before white men arrived, when men lived all as a big group, you can only imagine what happened. But I think, again, because community is central to us, like family and relationships and making sure that you look after community, there's a role around procreation.
Yeah.
And so, of course, in a modern world, it's a slightly different story. But some of those antiquated, systems are still around. And I think particularly in the 2017, not referendum, the 2017 plebiscite on LGBTI marriage.
On the gay rights, yeah.
I wrote in the HuffPost and SMH talking about that experience of being a Black fella and, essentially that there's people out in community that don't have access to a post box, that couldn't share their voice, but yet they're the ones that we need to be reaching out to because it was their identity on the line. Similar to this voice, where literally the 97% of our population is being asked to determine our futures, the 3% of the nation. And I guess having gone through both of those processes, it was very clear to me that we need strong Black rainbow voices out there because that will give somebody else a model to look up to or just, just a hint that it's okay to be who you are and you don't need to question yourself and you can love yourself.
And I love the fact that I'm able to, with a podcast, provide a platform for the diverse kind of thoughts and like our mob are so amazing in everything that we do. Your sister, a neurologist, right?
Yeah, she drives me crazy.
Yeah, but I love I didn't know that there was Black neurologist.
Yeah, she's the only one. She graduated about 7 years ago. It hasn't been one since. My best friend is the second Aboriginal dermatologist, and my other best friend is the third. I mean, the thing is that there are these stories of excellence out there, and particularly in Aboriginal health, that they're just not being told. And to be frank, because we're so worried about making sure our AMSs are looked after, these doctors are flying themselves around the country. They're so busy trying to get out to places like Alice Springs and Broome, to be working with community, that they don't have the time to be writing these epic big research papers and putting their names out in lights. I mean, my sister was pioneering, stroke treatment, so mobile stroke treatment, so she can video call with patients, while they're having symptoms, to be able to diagnose them as the ambulance is on the way there, so they don't have to wait to figure out what's wrong when they arrive, which can be the difference between somebody living or not. So she's too busy out there flogging herself to make an impact or an indent on the sort of the health gaps that we face, that she's not sitting down and doing these podcasts, and she doesn't have the time to, write these books and whatnot, because she actually wants to go out there and do it. But I think there's also value, as you said, in actually telling those stories and making sure that people know, if you want to be that, if you want to be the first Aboriginal surgeon, like, Kelvin Kong, he just won, NAIDOC Person of the Year.
I know.
That story needs to be told.
And I met him at the NAIDOC Awards and said, brother, you need to get on my podcast.
Well, he's coming out to you, Sid. He's a graduate of ours.
Well, hey, big shout out to you, Dr. Kelvin Kong. I'm really curious about a new charity, because we could sit here and yarn all day. No, look at this. But the new foundation charity that you've
First Nations Economics.
Can you tell us what inspired you to do to launch this new charity? Who's behind it? What's going on? Is there anything that you can share with us that we don't know yet?
Well, absolutely. I can share one thing, so I'll save that. So when I was at Treasury, a colleague of mine who's also on my board, Sean Cumming, we were the first two Aboriginal senior executive officers in New South Wales Treasury, the oldest colonial institution in all of the Southeast Asia, right? So like the most colonial institution, the people that get to make decisions about money. And you have something like native title or Aboriginal affairs, and they come to Treasury, who signs off on it and says, yes, this is good or bad, or this, is going to create a benefit. And yet there were non-Indigenous people making those decisions about our mob. And so Mike Pratt, who was the secretary at the time, said, no, we actually need to get some blackfellas in here so that we can make culturally appropriate decisions. So I joined the organisation and spent 2 years developing the state's first Indigenous expenditure reporting, which had some really troubling facts. Like, we found out that more than 60% of the money that we spent on Aboriginal people had never been checked to see if it was effective.
Okay.
I think about 2/3 of it were not self-determined. So Aboriginal people were not involved in the decision-making around designing that program.
Consultation process.
And yet we hear, about all of this money being wasted on Aboriginal people, and don't realise that money is also funding claims, like defending claims of native title.
Yes.
And so we joined, and then we also realised that, Aboriginal people haven't necessarily been brought into the fold when it comes to economics. As I said before, it makes up 30% of our health outcomes, socioeconomic status, and yet we didn't have any organisations that could go write you a business case that understood culture, that understood it's not just about the numbers, it's not just about the business case or the cost-benefit analysis, it's actually about our social, cultural and economic prosperity. So when I left government and I joined the university, I had an opportunity to create a new foundation. So we created First Nations Economics with the idea that we wanted to put Aboriginal people in the decision-making seat when it comes to policies and economic programs and these business cases. And so essentially we work with organisations like the New South Wales Coalition of Aboriginal Regional Alliances to help them develop business cases to prove, to government that culture is worth something, that there's more benefit, to learn how to use government's language against them. And because we do that, we are then able to reinvest our profits into financial literacy. And the thing that I was going to announce is that hopefully in the next couple of months, we're hoping to release quite a large scholarship for First Nations women studying for finance, economics or community governance. Because there's so few Aboriginal accountants, economists out there. We've just been denied these spaces for so long that it's about time we pick up our act and we start giving them the skills teaching them how to use the words of government, the processes of government, the economic formulas against them for our own communities, right? Because we have those skills, we have the ability. We just need to be given the opportunity, and that's
what I was going to ask. How do people get involved? Well, basically, they get on a website.
Absolutely.
Because it's out there. You've done really well with kind of launching it and getting the brand out there. So people just jump on a website and inquire to kind of engage you.
Absolutely. So, I mean, firstnationseconomics.com, pretty easy to remember. And look, the way that we work is we work with community-controlled organisations to do basically anything they want in the space. And then we work with governments and the rest to offset that. So if you're from government, I'm probably going to charge you a mint. But if you're community, that's what we're there designed for. So
I love the fact that, you've got the experience. First, you've grown up within your Aboriginal family and culture, so you get that. Then to go back into community, you're taking, when you were that little boy that went to boarding school and, learning everything you've learnt, you went to university.
Yeah.
What'd you study?
I studied to be a lawyer.
You studied to be a lawyer. I'm just thinking of, a lot of our people always say, don't forget where you come from, or make sure you come back to your community. Like, how do you give back to community? So you went to boarding school, you went to university, and you're now working at a university in, a pretty prominent position, right? Associate Dean.
Associate Dean. Yeah, being called a professor, it's I could have never imagined it. So
I know, and this is the point, right, for our mob, young people, anybody watching this podcast or even listening to this podcast, It's not even about, getting out of your comfort zone. You cannot be what you cannot see, and I hear it a lot, and I love it actually, and I'll always say you can't be what you can't see. Representation matters. Hearing your story on this couch or watching it, if you're watching on YouTube, and I know it will inspire anyone, but in particular our mob, who have been locked out of the economy. Literacy and numeracy for my nan was grade 3 level.
Yep.
So there's been this big shift, and people say sometimes to me when I deliver training, okay, there's life expectancy and infant death mortality rates and diabetes and incarceration, suicide, all of these kind of, you think that they're kind of priority areas that are part of closing the gap.
They're underpinned by economics.
They are underpinned by economics. But we're not, and I see it a lot, and that's why I love the podcast and getting all these different people on here, is that we're not exposed to Black excellence. We're always seen, and the media thrive off this, of the deficit model.
Yeah.
So sitting here, I'm just like, far out. I know that there's more to this story. It's like, how long is a piece of string? We could be here all night celebrating and amplifying and showcasing what Black excellence is and Black success. Yeah. We need more of our mob to, take those opportunities and take them with two hands. My little fella, he's 13 in grade 7, and I wanted him to go to Nudgee Boys College.
Yeah.
We live on the sunny coast. He wanted to stay at Coolum High. But I said, what, there's opportunities here, Anyways, we decided to leave him with us at home in Coolum. But my Aunt Lilla, and I'll never forget this, she said to me, send your kids to the best private schools.
Yep.
Because the kids that they're going to hang around with and grow up with, they're going to be lawyers, doctors, politicians, judges. And we need our kids to be mixing it with these kids.
And look, it's tough, right? Like, I had my 15-year high school reunion this year and I chose not to go. My experience in high school was the most difficult experience I've ever had. I was fat, I was Black, I came out, I was called Chaboriginal, which was Chinese Aboriginal or Chubby Aboriginal, depending on what I was told by teachers that I would never do well enough. And it was a handful, one of them was my French teacher, a couple of teachers that really actually saw through some of that and said, I see a spark. And I remember the life-changing moment for me is that we had Professor Marianne Binsalik, who's an emeritus professor at Charles Sturt University. She came out and she spoke to a couple of us Aboriginal boys, and the high school, Joey's, is very much football-oriented. And so she asked all of us one by one what we wanted to do, and everyone said, I want to be an NRL player. And I thought, I'm going to be smart here, right? And I said, oh, you know what? One day I want to be a politician. And I thought she was going to pat me on the back. You know, I was looking up at her, or instead she threatened to kneecap me and said, why would you aim for mediocrity when you could become the Prime Minister of the country? Screw that. Why would you want to become the Prime Minister when you can become the President? And so she told me that mediocrity was not good enough. And having someone see that potential in me and not be afraid to tell me in a way that I needed to hear it was life-changing. And I hope, you know, by listening to this podcast, listening to your stories and the stories of your guests, that kids out there that are going through a rough time, that are being forced to choose between family and culture and their education, that are struggling or told that they're not good enough, that even in your worst possible moments, it is culture and family that will lift you up, and that strength and identity that will keep you going, because we are a resilient mob. We've been around since time immemorial, and we certainly ain't going nowhere. And I think we just need to remind ourselves of that, especially when we're young, because the world tries to beat it out of you, but, you know, when you get to see that Black excellence, listen to people like you, it can change someone's life.
And that's exactly where I was going to with, you know, being, I guess, being immersed in that boarding school, white fella institution, that kind of, it's a life because you're there, you're living there, and home is, you know, far.
My mum didn't even have a home phone.
I know. So here I am just thinking to myself and trying to figure out for my kids, right? A lot of people say to me, you know, send them, like my Aunt Lila, send them to the best schools, give them the best opportunities. They're going to mix it with the, you know, the future, you know, people that are going to run this country. But at what cost? And some of our young people can actually, you know, I don't want to use
the system,
but I don't want to use the word toughen it out, or, you know.
No, but that's what you have to do. So you have to develop a thickness of skin.
Yeah.
Because, you know, my experience in boarding school is not all that different from being in the corporate world and working in a big bank or being in a university. Not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone's going to respect you. I mean, sometimes people will see me. I remember the first day I started, I had someone tap me on the shoulder at the university and say, oh, sorry, this is for university executives. Students need to go out that way. Because the idea that someone like me could fit in a place like that, you know.
They did not think you were part of the university's executive.
No.
Stop.
No, but I mean, but that's the thing, because
but you're okay with it. It's like,
absolutely.
No, I'm here.
You got to own that space.
It's like me in the priority queue. And I won't name them, but anyways, we're over that now. And I was asked with my 5 black kids and my husband not if I was in the wrong line. I was shown the other queue, which was going all the way down the terminal. And I was like, no, I know, I'm in the right queue.
But people needed to see you do that. People needed to see you stick up for yourself, because how many people have, you know, they saved up.
That wasn't the first time, but that wasn't the first time that I've been asked if I was in the right queue. But because I was with my kids and my 13-year-old, I said, Mum, what did he say to you? I said, well, he just was letting us know that this is for priority boarding. And he said, but you're platinum. I said, well, I am platinum. Which is not a good thing, because it means I'm away from my kids a lot.
Yeah.
Way too much. So I don't even want to keep my platinum status. I'd be happy.
Take up that space, right? Stand in that line.
Well, usually I just brush it off, you know, and I think this is really important that we're having these conversations, and it is 2023, and we are still dealing with, you know, people that are kind of stuck in their old mindsets that could not possibly see successful Aboriginal people like us, you know, navigating, taking up these spaces. What would you say to young people? Because I'm hoping that more and more of our mob that are listening to this podcast and watching as well, that are at university, and I'm not, you know, I still call them young at the university, young people, our mob in university, because I know for a lot of our mob, on average, it takes about 10 years for a First Nations person to graduate. What would your advice be, or just some kind of words of encouragement, or even, you know, some advice for people that are listening now that are torn between, is this for me? I can't deal with it. Like, is it mentors that helped you?
Absolutely.
Support networks, finding your community.
All of those things, right? Like, for me to stand up, and I even feel uncomfortable to say it, but to say I'm successful, what that doesn't tell you is the countless, in particular, women that have stood behind me and pushed me forward. You know, my mum, my grandmother, my colleagues, Professor Arnie Marianne Bin Salek, even people like Brendan Thomas over at DCJ when I was working in government, just someone that I could call and be like, you're a black fella, you know, you're in a similar position, you've experienced this.
Yeah, I mean, how would you navigate this, or how do I respond to this?
We are so used to this fight or flight mode where we need to go, no, I need to take control of the situation. I need to do it on my own. I need to prove something. And I guess my advice is you have no one to prove anything to except yourself. And don't be afraid to rely on community, rely on your mentors and your friends and your family, because they're the ones that will be there in the end. They're the ones that will love you regardless of what your version of success is. And I think that we also don't need to have one version of success. I mean, my little sister came to live with me when she was 12 years old, which, you know, as two blokes that knew almost nothing about girls, was an experience, right? To have a preteen come and move in with you until she turned 18.
Oh, stop.
But, you know, if she was to turn around to me tomorrow and say, I want to be a photographer and I'm probably going to make $300 a week, but it's going to make me happy. If that's her version of success, as long as she works hard and she's satisfied in herself, I'm happy with that. You know, I think there's so much pressure that you have to be a lawyer or a doctor. That's not what success is. Success is that love that you have for yourself, that pride that you have for yourself. And that's something that no one except you can take away. And that gives us strength. And I think, again, you know, we come from a people of communities, right? You know, we shared what we had. We shared love. We shared resources. We shared stories. And that there is a strength in that fabric, of that social fabric, that support that can get you through the darkest of times.
There is so much that we can teach the rest of the world. And that exchange is so rich. And it's a cultural exchange. When we do business with non-Aboriginal people, you know, they're learning from us a different way. I love the fact that there's more and more of us that are able to share what success looks like. What is it like being at a university in a position where not many people look like you? The fact that you know, just got back from Bali, had a beautiful little holiday, and now you're here in Sydney about to go to Supply Nation, to the big trade show tomorrow. Your first time exhibiting?
Yep.
Are you excited?
As hell. I mean, like, it's, for me, it's just the culmination of me turning a middle finger to my, you know, what I had expectations of my career, and going, you know what, this is what I want. This is important. This is going to make me happy. It's going to make a difference. No, I mean, I'm not going to go make millions of dollars running a charity. That's fine. You know, I'll milk the university and some of these big roles with the work that comes with them to provide that stability. But that privilege enables me to run First Nations economics. It gives me that opportunity to give back, and that is what makes me happy. And so, I'm just excited to sit down and have conversations with mob from all over the country and hear about their versions of success.
Get ready. Get ready. It literally is, I'll be honest with people, you know, whether you like Supply Nation or not, or you're Supply Nation certified, or you're not even in business yet, but you've thought about being in business, this is actually the place to be. It's once a year. It's in Sydney.
It's the first place I met you, actually.
Is it?
So you had been working with Bayer, where my husband worked at the time, and he was like, oh my God, you need to meet this woman, Mundanara. She's amazing. And I'd already stalked you on LinkedIn. And I remember I came up to you and I actually spoke to you about Aboriginal businesses, and I said I was scared because I didn't know, you know, if it would be super competitive, if people would like treat each other nice. And then I look around at you and Crystal Kinsella having a ball, you know, like everyone's supporting each other, and there was so much love in that room. It was nothing like the big corporates that I'd worked in. And I went, you know what, there is space for me here. So I mean, I think it's super important, you know, to be able to share that with each other. And, you know, I remember that conversation very fondly. It certainly helped me in this journey.
So I just want to say thank you, Rick Macourt. I didn't even say your name at the start. Thank you so much for just jumping on, making time to be here. But yeah, thanks so much for stopping in. I'll let you get to your next event.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. If you'd like any more info on today's guest, please visit our show notes in the episode description. A big shout out to all you Deadly Mob and allies who continue to listen, watch and support our podcast. Your feedback means the world. You can rate and review the podcast on Apple and Spotify, or even head to our socials and YouTube channel and drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. The Black Magic Woman podcast is produced by Clint Curtis.